Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Randy Sue Pollack, and I'm the president-elect of the Northern District of California chapter for the Federal Bar Association. Today, we're very privileged to host a program focusing on the fentanyl and opioid problem that is plaguing not only our city, but the entire nation. This program today evolved from a session that was held during the Northern District Judicial Conference in April. It's evolved, and it's an entirely different format. We are pleased today to have Sam Quinones, who is a very well-known writer and journalist who has covered this issue extensively. He is best known for his reporting in Mexico and in the United States and for his chronicling of the opioid crisis in America. He will be joined in conversation today with Judge Thompson, who moderated the program in April and who is very invested in this program. I'd like to give a shout out to Ryan Rezai, who is Assistant United States Attorney, who was instrumental in having this program today. But I'd also give a very special shout out to Joseph Tartakovsky, who is an Assistant United States Attorney, who gave Ryan the idea of having Mr. Quinones here today. So, thank you. Before we start today, I'd like to welcome all people who are members of the Federal Bar Association and encourage those of you who are not yet members to please join. The Federal Bar is the preeminent federal organization for individuals who practice in federal court. The FBA was founded in 1920 to strengthen the federal legal system and to serve the interests of the federal practitioner, both public and private, the general public, as well as the judiciary. Our chapter here in the Northern District is very active, presenting programs basically for almost every month. Presently, we have a special membership drive. For anyone who is not yet a member of the FBA, you'll receive a 20% discount. And for judicial law clerks who are present today, we have an amazing deal that if you join, you will get 1 year for $20. So I encourage all of you to join. In the link that was sent out to everyone last week, there was the membership join link in there, and you'll be receiving another one tomorrow. Some housekeeping remarks. This is also being broadcast as a webinar. There will be, and it will be posted on our federal website for the Federal Northern District chapter. There will be approximately 45 minutes of questions. So when Judge Thompson gets to that point, we will be using a mic to get questions from those of you here today and hopefully off of the webinar. So with that, I will turn the program over to Judge Thompson.
Thank you. And thank you all for spending this afternoon with us. There are additional individuals who we have to give some credit for. David Risk was one of the attorneys who assisted us with our spring seminar, along with Kimberly Hopkins, Dominique Williams, who's a student at UC Berkeley School of Law, also did a great deal of research which provided the foundation, along with Lisa Tarasuk. Also, Candy Mitchell also submitted a number of questions as well. So this is a community of questions. This is a community that has concern about what is going on in the close proximity of our courthouse. Fentanyl has become quite an epidemic. It is a synthetic opioid painkiller that is up to 100 times stronger than morphine. It is commonly used to treat severe pain, such as surgery during cancer surgery. However, it also has increasingly been used for illicit purposes and recreational purposes. It's often mixed with drugs such as heroin and cocaine. In the recent past, students in the Bay Area have suffered from either heart attacks or fatalities in which they thought they were buying recreational cannabis and were alarmed by their parents finding them unresponsive because it was laced with fentanyl. We don't want to repeat the same mistakes we made when the crack cocaine epidemic occurred. This seminar is for us to try to find out what is different about this particular drug, what are some of the different ways in which we can actually service those individuals in our community who are suffering, but also those who are putting people at risk. Due to its potency, Fentanyl is often sold illegally in small quantities, which increases the risk of accidental overdose. It's important to be aware of the signs of fentanyl overdose, such as severe respiratory depression, pinpoint pupils, and unconsciousness, and seek medical attention immediately for those that you suspect that are on the verge of suffering from an overdose. Fentanyl is a controlled substance that should only be used under supervision of a healthcare provider. If you recall, we had a physician who was part of our prior panel, and she spent a great deal talking about what goes on at Highland Hospital and those who are incarcerated in Santa Rita when they need care. Dr. Garrick was very clear about some of the resources that are available to this immediate community. It's important to follow the prescribed doses, as she indicated, and not to share medication with others. But in this discussion, we're not talking about supervised use of fentanyl. We're not talking about what happens when you have surgery or when you've suffered a heart attack and may have been prescribed fentanyl in the course of your surgery. We're talking about what is going on now. And so, Mr. Quinones, thank you so much. People have no idea what you had to do to get here today, the plane and getting here, and then he has a plane that he has to catch immediately thereafter. But let's just jump right in.
Yeah.
Can you tell me what is the difference between this epidemic, and you and I were both around during the crack epidemic, what's different this time? And even talk about your familiarity with the Tenderloin as a reporter.
Yeah, thank you, Judge, and thanks to you all for showing up to hear me talk. It's good to be with you in a federal courthouse. I never thought I'd be on this side of the federal. I've been on that side many a time. Can barely hear what y'all are saying, by the way. But basically, the fentanyl is as you said, a synthetic drug made only from chemicals. This is what makes this different, in my opinion. One of the many things that makes this a very different situation now, and that is that the Mexican trafficking world has figured out that the benefits of making your own drugs rather than growing them are substantial. And you can make your drugs if you control the access to the ingredients, which they do from certain couple of ports on the western side of Mexico and the Mexico City airport, granting them access to the entire world chemical market, primarily the ingredients coming from China, which allows them to import enormous quantities of precursors, and that means enormous quantities of drugs, fentanyl and methamphetamine, and that's why you see both of those drugs covering the country. I don't think we've ever seen one source. I don't even think the Colombian cocaine traffickers achieved what these guys have achieved with fentanyl and methamphetamine, covering the entire country all the way up into New England, from LA to New England. And that is what is very different about it. Also, I think one of the things that really stands out, I believe, about this thing as compared to what happened in the past was that not only were these two drugs much more available nationwide, but they're coming in potencies that are also staggering. You just don't see you've never seen the kind of potency of these drugs are so potent and they're so in people's faces. And again, it's not just urban areas, it's rural areas, it's suburban areas. There's really almost no parts of the country where you don't see fentanyl and methamphetamine. The other thing that I think they do that other drugs have done, but to maybe even a more stark degree, is thwart the user's basic instincts for survival. Now, you saw that with alcohol. The first time I ever saw this was in the Bowery. We lived in New York for a year. We happened on the Bowery one day when the Bowery was Skid Row for New York City many years ago. I was 10, and I didn't understand what I was seeing, all these men sleeping in trash and all this. My dad said, well, they're just slowly committing suicide. That's what he told me. But it gets to the idea that all these drugs really do a very powerful number on thwarting or redirecting our basic powerful instincts for self-preservation, for survival, away from our own preservation towards finding the drug. And that means that you find people now refusing treatment. In Los Angeles, there's I think they call it the 95 initiative. I can't remember what the full title is. 95 is in the title, because 95% of the people that they offer treatment to refuse it, even though they're in tent encampments and whatever.
This is a good point. And you used to cover the Tenderloin.
Yeah.
And coming back, you said how startling it was to see what's going on.
Yeah.
And when we talk about treatment models, people don't realize there's relapse,
Yeah.
and that there's a dedicated effort towards treatment. What do you think are some of the solutions, given that you do recognize that people aren't exercising free will at a certain point?
No, I think they are not. In fact, I think that's correct. I think they lose that ability very quickly with some of these synthetics, given the fact that they're so prevalent, so potent. It's just like impossible to get away from them. I believe that given what I've just described, that we have to use the leverage of law enforcement, because that is the only way people that I've seen, people actually are pushed, nudged, cajoled, whatever the verb you want to use, towards finding treatment. Otherwise, people, as I say, 95% of those folks in Los Angeles who are offered treatment will stay on the street, even as they're being pimped out, even as they're being beaten, even as they're living in feces and all the rest. And remember, getting people off the street is the issue, such important, because the street itself always has been a center of trauma. You're beaten, you are again, pimped out. There's all kinds of things that happen on the street that make it kind of a vector of trauma, and trauma makes it very difficult for people to want treatment, to want to get away from it. This frequently you find the case being. And so it feels to me like we need to understand that people need a counterbalancing of force against the power of these drugs that are now facing Americans all across the country.
You mentioned law enforcement as kind of the strong arm.
Yeah.
And we almost missed the sweet spot in the crack era, where people were pretty much arrest.
Yes.
And then they didn't make a differentiation between the people who were users and the people who were sellers. We had a discussion about some of the things in your book about the judge that had the drug court, and how can the court be a vehicle towards treatment and having a hybrid.
I think one of the things that happened during the crack years when I was a crime reporter in Stockton, that's where I kind of began my crime reporting career, and ever since then I've just considered myself a crime reporter, is that back then the problem was not that we use law enforcement, but that we only use law enforcement, right? And nobody that I remember in any part of Stockton or San Joaquin County proposed anything different back then. It was kind of just assumed that it was law enforcement's job, and you just, but midway through it all, I could see that there were police officers, at least some of them anyway, who were saying, guys, this just doesn't seem to be working. We have not built alliances with the community, number one. I think that was one of the main things back then anyway. But it was really this idea that it was just a cop's job, and you guys take care of it. And the crack problem was so widespread and had that very same effect on people's minds, you know, of thwarting kind of the self-preservation instinct, that it was the time when we kind of came to the understanding that we need more than that. Now, I think the problem is today in certain parts of the country, and I would say maybe San Francisco is one of them, is that we've gone the far extreme. Where you say, no, law enforcement has no role, or very, very little role, and I don't believe that either. This is a community aspect. Addiction is extraordinarily complicated because it deals with the brain chemistry. We all have that brain chemistry. We can all be that addict eating from the trash. Because it's so it involves all the brain chemistry, we need, I believe, a wide and varied community approach, meaning using various tools from across the community. Unfortunately, in some areas, I would say, I'm from LA, I would say definitely they've moved away from this as well. The idea that you should be, you know, arresting people who sell fentanyl is somehow like passé, or my feeling is these are people selling a a drug is the same as firing a gun into a crowd. You know you're going to hurt somebody, you're going to kill somebody most likely.
Now let's go back and start working our way forward. We now
Sure.
have talked about the crack epidemic. We've
Yeah.
talked about how fentanyl is a little different. And we've talked about at the end of this, we need alliances with the community. But people don't even know what to look for. What are some of the things that you found in your research? After I read your article in The Atlantic and The Washington Post, what were some of the symptoms that you saw that differentiated people from users than those who were probably selling? What were some of the
Well, I would say
observations?
that a lot of people who are selling are also users. I would say, too, though, that if you're doing that, one of the truths about fentanyl is there is no such thing as a long-term fentanyl addict. Everyone's going to die. Okay, really have to get your mind around that idea, I think. And I've heard this way too often across the country now from people I've talked to, interviewed, users, addicts, counselors, et cetera.
And what are some of the physical manifestations of it? We see people bent over.
Yeah.
We see them talking to themselves. What are some of the
It's
mental
an
health?
opioid. It's an opioid. It has the same, numbing effect. It sends you into a kind of a suspended animation. It has the problem with fentanyl that makes it very different from heroin is that what makes it a great anesthetic in the surgical setting, as you were mentioning, is that it takes you in and out of anesthesia very quickly. But what that does to an addict is it takes you in and out of it gets you, it satisfies your cravings and then very quickly takes you out of it. So you are constantly having to use. It's a very important part of the fentanyl use that with heroin, 2-3 times a day. If you have a lot of money, 3 times a day. If you don't, it's twice. Normally, that was my experience with people that I've interviewed. But with fentanyl, you're using 6, 7, 8 times a day. And sometimes the tolerances, I would say people on your streets here, their tolerances are sky high by now, most likely. If they've survived their first exposure to fentanyl, and now it's just a question of making sure they keep the withdrawals, the chills and the diarrhea and the sweating, et cetera, all that stuff that happens with any opioid, heroin or any other opioid, going to happen to you on fentanyl, much more severe on fentanyl because the tolerance is so high. So now what you're doing is just using all day long. So that means you have 6 to 8 chances to kill yourself every day. And that is the nature of fentanyl. That's why it's also true that I'm not sure about this town, but I've been all over this country, and there's almost no heroin on the streets of America anymore. Even Baltimore, where they made The Wire, right? That's a fentanyl town now. It's just outcompeted. And people have, switched, or people have been transitioned, passive voice there, to fentanyl from heroin. Not because they wanted to. In my opinion, I have to say this also. This is about supply creating demand. It's not about demanding fentanyl. No heroin addict in his right mind ever wanted to use fentanyl
And
instead of
that's a
heroin.
good point. We've talked about how there are these precursors, the drugs that came before, and then how is it different from oxycodone, as well as those precursors, and the fact that people didn't even know that they were getting marijuana or something that was laced with fentanyl.
Yes.
How did that evolve?
Well, I think what happened was it's all about supply. Again, I think that down in Mexico, they've been making so much of it. Along the way, back in 2017, we were talking about, in the book, I interviewed one of the first people to actually begin trafficking those counterfeit pills that are now coming in by the tens of millions. They began to see, at first they were just trafficking bricks of fentanyl powder thing. Then they say, well, why not put them into pills? It's just like a market innovation that allows them to bring it up here. They know our love affair with pills as a culture is huge. And so they begin to make these pills. Once one person sees how profitable it is and how easy it is to buy a pill press on the internet, et cetera, pretty soon now the supply being made down in Mexico is staggering. I would refer you all, if you want, to see a really interesting Twitter feed. A rare, interesting Twitter feed, I would say, is go to Michael Humphreys, who's the director of Customs and Border Patrol for the Nogales Port of Entry in Arizona. He puts up every couple of days the seizures that they make of those pills now. And I believe they're now seizing roughly, I would say, like 1 million pills a week. Plus, they puts up all of those assault weapons that are bought here, that are going south, that are funding, or I'm sorry, protecting traffickers and their ability to make the quantities. I mean, I guess the main way I've changed my thinking is that I thought a lot of this was demand-driven. I don't believe that anymore. I believe that it's really supply-driven, and I believe the gun thing is as well.
And that's a good point. When you say it's supply-driven and you've talked about these alliances that we need to make within the community, in your article, you also talk about transforming jails and having the ability to do forbearance towards treatment, meaning that you kind of take the supply away and then transform the jails into those treatment units and having those alliances.
Yeah, very important.
But at the same time, how do we prevent incarcerating people who've already been victimized, trafficked?
Well, I mean, I think we're not.
In other words, how do we do harm reduction?
Yeah, I would say the transforming jail is the best form of harm reduction, in my opinion, or a very good form. I'm not sure the best. A very good form of harm reduction. What have we done with jail up to now? So jail is a place where you put people. And it's the very symbol of the throw away the key idea. If you go across the country, you see jails, and pretty much all that way. You know, you go there, you throw a person's in jail for 6, 9 months, whatever, and he's watching Judge Judy every afternoon. He's sleeping, playing poker, and if he ever has any ideas about stopping the drug use that got him into jail, which most folks are there for. He becomes a snitch or a quitter or whatever. The problem is that when we take people off the street, just at that very moment they've been obeying the drugs for months. They get into jail and they detox and they become clearer in their thinking, and it's at that very moment that we plunge them into a boring, tedious, very often predatory, potentially life-mangling situation. What's been fascinating to me is to watch how in some parts of the country, particularly those parts where they've been dealing with the opioid epidemic, first, back to the mid-90s, Ohio, Kentucky, places like that, they understand the importance of, first of all, getting people off the street, because nobody's finding readiness for treatment while on the street. And before meth drives them to mental illness and fentanyl kills them. There just hasn't been happening. So you get people you arrest them, you put them in jail, they have a time to then break from these drugs that are about to kill them. In some counties, and I think it's exciting to watch, and I would point you all, by the way, if you ever get to Columbus, Ohio has one of the great new approaches to jail that I've ever seen. It's a remarkable thing. I don't probably have time to talk about it. Maybe later we'll talk about it. But really, I would visit these areas. But these are recovery pods where it's a jail. So jail, you frequently encounter drugs in jail, not in these pods. These pods are run by the inmates. You wake up, you volunteer in. You make your bed at 8 in the morning, and then for the rest of the day, no Judge Judy, no poker, none of that, no bartering. There's all these rules that are very much about accountability. They get you booted, weird sex stuff, all kinds of predatory behavior, that kind of stuff. You are in classes all day long, GED classes at this jail in Columbus. They're going to be having high school and college classes. You are then in 12-step meetings. There's a workout rooms in this one jail. There's actually workout rooms. It's an amazing idea. There's social workers that sign you up for medically assisted treatment when you leave. These are jails where they are thinking about what happens to you when you leave. I think that's a radical idea. No jailer, I think, in America has really thought too much about that up to now. And then you have medically supervised withdrawal, because fentanyl requires it. You just can't say, well, here's your cell for a while and just be throwing up and diarrhea for
Well,
the
I'm
next
glad
week.
you mentioned that, because that was something Dr. Garrick at our previous conference mentioned, that Highland Hospital has the Bridge program, and they have programs that could be utilized and nobody has to recreate the wheel, but these alliances haven't taken place. No one's having conversation with community agencies, how this can work.
Yeah.
Santa Rita has the Deuces program. There's programming that's available,
Right.
but everybody's in silos. No one's having a conversation, and it needs to come from leadership.
And I would say that in the book, the 3 chapters that I read about this county in Kentucky, one of the interesting things about Kentucky is it's a leader in jail transformation, because that it's the only state in the country which elects its jailer. It's not like the sheriff appoints a captain, which I think is a system that really is from a different era and needs to be replaced. So anyway, in this one county, experimenting with jail produced a whole continuum of care on the outside. As they began to kind of stumble forward as an experiment, they're trying to figure it all out. I thought it was very exciting to watch. I was there when they first opened it, and then I've been coming back there ever since for like 8 years now.
But that sounds like a resource-rich community.
No, it's no way. It's Kentucky. Okay.
So that's what I'm saying.
I'm sorry. It's
So
not.
you're saying that
it's not. It's middle. It's middle class. It's not resource. I mean, San Francisco compared to San Francisco. No. Come on.
So
No.
San Francisco should be able to replicate
Oh
this
my
model.
goodness gracious! See, the thing is this: these pods are cheaper to run than regular pods because there's less fighting. The inmates clean it themselves. There's more buy-in. There's no drugs in these pods, no weapons. It's a remarkable transformation. You just have to think. You have to have the political will to do it, but it's cheaper if you do it. You do have to have the physical infrastructure. That's a problem for some counties, particularly small counties. They just don't have it. But I mean, this county has now an entire nonprofit. This experiment in jail did an amazing thing in this one county, and that is it ignited all this latent energy and nonprofit and volunteer energy that was out there, but had not thought it was really important to participate because it was not, why try, and this doesn't work, nothing works, forget it, So this entire nonprofit, very large nonprofit, totally redirected its mission towards helping people reaccommodate once they get out, providing them a shuttle to the nonprofit instead of having to take the bus downtown with them meet their old friends. And then they have job placement, they have sober living, there's tattoo removal run by a woman who was one of these people who just came out of the woodwork and bought a tattoo removal machine with money that her husband left her when he died. Now you get your tattoos removed. So you get this whole continuum of care. Drug court is definitely part of it, to expunge those cases that will prevent you from getting housing or finding work or whatever, that kind of thing.
Right.
But also to maintain that law enforcement vigilance. Drug addiction recovery, in my opinion, is a combination of carrot and stick. And it's about accountability more than anything else. And if you just say, yeah, anything goes, that's a recipe for disaster and for failure, I would say. What you're finding is this continuum of care, which exists in every other form of medicine. I mean, I'm a heart attack patient. I had a heart attack in 2017. What's a continuum of care for a heart attack? Well, these pills every day, then you go to your cardiologist, et cetera, et cetera. You work out, I swim, I walk, et cetera, et cetera. That's all part of the continuum of care. Continuum of care for addiction is driver's license recovery, paying your probation fines, finding housing, all this stuff. And what happened in this one county, this one county was interesting because it's a very conservative place. But everybody in their county knew somebody now who was strung out on pills or heroin or now fentanyl. And so they had a transformation of political will that was fascinating to behold, frankly. But it helped create a continuum of care that did not exist. So now the local university sends 2 interns, I think gets public health or social work interns every semester to the jail. I've never heard of a jail with college interns working there, It's a totally different way of thinking of jail, but is brought on first by, of course, the opioid epidemic. That's what it was first in response to, but now, which made it a good idea. Now I just believe that jail now is an essential element in all this because it's the place where you can be put and you cannot leave when the dope tells you that you must, right? And
So what are the alliances that people would need in order to make this
Well,
work?
I think first of all, there's alliance. There's clearly a support by the political electeds, right? All of the board of supervisors, the jailer who, this is on now the second jailer. The first jailer was 100% behind this. He was the one really pushing it. The judges were all involved. Everybody at the local law enforcement level seemed to be thinking we need to do, they could see what wasn't working. We need to try something else. Then, as time goes on, they begin to make these alliances with this nonprofit, Life Learning Center, it's called. Then with Northern Kentucky University. Then with certain other groups, churches, Rotary. The jailer fires the food director and brings in a food director who provides food for the jail, but also trains people in food safe, or what's it, food serve? Camera. Serve safe, which is the restaurant industry's protocol for food handling so they can find work when they get out. It's all about this idea of saying for the first time, jailers are thinking in terms of what to do when you get out, when this person gets out of my jail so it doesn't come back. And this is now essential, again, I say, because people are not finding the readiness for treatment on the street. They are refusing treatment, in fact. And this is a way of saying, no, this is the way we need to move this along. And people will not find that readiness on the street before meth drives them mad and fentanyl kills them. And that is the basic fact that makes this, you were asking earlier what's different about this now. To me, that's one of the basic facts that makes this so different from anything that we've seen before.
I have two more questions, and then I'm going to open it up for questions. While I'm asking these questions, I'm going to ask people to line up on this side, and then I'm going to surrender the microphone so that they can answer questions.
Sure.
How, in your opinion, does illicit fentanyl use contribute to the homelessness that we're seeing? And again, I keep harping back to your time here as a reporter in the Tenderloin and the startling things that you saw when you came today.
Yeah, and I would say that both those drugs, meth and fentanyl, play a very important role in, I think they're major drivers of our homelessness problem. They're major drivers in our mental illness problems as well that we're seeing all across the country now that these drugs both are nationwide. There's more to this than just these drugs. On the other hand, I've found it, as I got into the writing this, particularly in Los Angeles, I was very dismayed to find people talking as if homelessness had nothing to do with either one of those. I could not, for the life of me, believe anybody would actually hold that view if it spent any time among tent encampments and all that kind of stuff. So, but also, to get back to your question, fentanyl, one of the many things that fentanyl has changed is that it now makes us probably in the history of the planet the country that has seen more overdoses to an opioid of one kind or another, mainly fentanyl, than any other in the history of the planet. But also, very important, because of the use of naloxone, the antidote to overdose, it means that we have seen more people overdose and be revived. Now, it's a good thing. Mm-hmm. However, you don't get a free ride here with this. Every time people overdose to an opioid, it shuts down a delivery of oxygen to the brain. It covers the respiratory system. So people are going into temporary brain deprivation of oxygen to the brain. And this means over a period of time, there's a certain amount of brain impairment that keeps people from making these kind of long-term consequential decisions about what to do with their lives. And what's happening with fentanyl is that on the street, people are overdosing repeatedly. So you're finding people with 20, 30, 40 sometimes overdoses to their name. On the NFL, you get a concussion, they keep you out for whatever it is, 3 weeks, 6 weeks, whatever it is, because brain injury researchers clearly understand the importance of brain healing. But on the street, You do not get that. People are overdosing once, and then a day later, and again, and 2 days later after that, and then a week later after that. There is no healing. At the same time, they're on the street. And as I said, the street is a major factory of trauma and brain trauma, beatings, falls, accidents, domestic violence, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so fentanyl has been, in my opinion, is almost a drug that keeps people homeless, keeps people in that state of being imprisoned on the street. And I think that's a major thing about reason for what we see in our tent encampments.
Yeah. And I was going to ask you about the tent encampments. I said I only had 2 questions, and so, okay, I'm like the attorneys. I got one more.
Yeah.
You know, when it comes to the crossover of the individuals you're seeing in these tent camps, are some of them vets who've made their way back from Afghanistan? Are they people who are suffering and didn't get their SSI worked out, and so they're having voices in their head, and this is something to self-medicate with? Are you seeing it cross over into our military, into our social security system, where they failed?
And also, all of that, yes. And I would say, too, a lot of the people who are being let out of prison, they don't have a lot of family support. Maybe their family is all dead, maybe their family's disowned them, whatever. They too are part of that mix. There's a lot of people who have, you know, I was right about 3 chapters in the book about the town of Clarksburg, West Virginia, where they had no homeless people at all. I mean, that they knew of, really, none. And then the methamphetamine out of Mexico that creates such staggering mental illness and schizophrenia that's coming out of Mexico in the last 10 years arrived, and all of a sudden they have huge amounts of, and it was pretty much anybody. It was young people, it was business owners who lost their business, you know. And so I think but all of this is a function of supply. The more supply that's out there, the more people have it in their face, the more people can encounter it, the more people it can do damage to, et cetera. You know, it's like alcohol. Alcohol is the same thing. We've had it everywhere. It's very cheap, and we see the example of that. And I think meth and fentanyl have just done what every commercial marketer of any consumer product wants, which is reduction of friction to use. Right? You want to be able to go into to be able to go into a 7-Eleven and buy a soda real easily, right? You want to be, if you're Netflix, you to not even take the time to stop watching. They keep you watching. Well, this friction, no friction to use, is a fundamental tenet of consumer marketing, particularly for a lot of goods that can be considered semi-addictive. And I think that's kind of what's happening with all the supply coming out of Mexico in the last, of these 2 drugs in particular.
And it's interesting that you use 2017 as a marker, and I think sometimes we have to remind everybody there was this intervener called COVID.
True.
And so there was a lot of things that went unnoticed, unserviced, and exploded.
Yeah.
One of the things that we've noticed is that there are individuals who are human trafficked, who are out there, and they somehow are crossing over in this fentanyl community. What have you learned from your research, or is this a new phenomenon?
No. Well, first of all, I mean, it depends what you mean by trafficking or being trafficked. If there's a suggestion that there's people down in, say, Honduras, for example, with guns to the head of your sister, and I'm going to kill your sister unless you sell heroin for me, that I just don't see that as very
So you don't think that there's human trafficking that affect drug trafficking in the San Francisco Bay Area? For example, people have been brought over by coyote or something, and then they're saying, okay, you got to pay.
Well, this is a way for poor people to come north. It's been used forever to say now, and I've covered the border quite a long time, written quite a bit about this, and I think that what's happened is that there is, poor people don't have the money to pay a coyote whatever it costs now, which is several $1,000s. And so one way of getting to the United States is to say, I will come up and you will sell for me until you pay off your debt. Now, frequently what then happens, I saw this in LA frequently, is that people don't stop. Once they pay off the debt, they keep on, because there's nothing that'll make you the kind of money working in a factory, drywall hanging, all that's never going to make you the kind of money that you can make selling heroin. I would say, though, I've never written about the Hondurans, although I've been kind of exposed to them periodically in my book prior to this.
And you're speaking of Dreamland?
Dreamland, right. The book prior to this was about a very similar system, but in the state of Nayarit, in the town of Jalisco, Nayarit, where all the guys came north to sell heroin, black tar heroin in a system that looked very much like a pizza delivery, but just for heroin. And in a poor town where everybody knew each other, a poor area region of several towns, where everybody kind of knew each other, knew where everybody lived, everyone was related and kind of somewhere or another, there's no need to force people to do it. People willingly raised their hands to say, yes, I want to come. Why? Because they saw their friends who they went to kindergarten with coming back with brand new Levi's 501 jeans. So it's a huge thing in that town, the Levi's 501 jeans, as a recruiting poster for black tar heroin sales.
This gets complicated because it's kind of a sweeping commentary. I guess my question is, what were some of your methodology for obtaining information? What was your research method?
Right. Basically, when it comes to this stuff, I'd spend a lot of time reaching out to people in prison. All the Mexican traffickers that I covered in Dreamland were all in prison when I contacted them. Some of them then got out later, but a couple of them. But mostly it was guys who were from Nayarit, from Jalisco, Nayarit, and they all were in prison for varying, and it's a process I go through that is, I wrote to lots of guys. I think I must have written to about 60 of the Jalisco boys when I was writing the book, and you get 10, 12. They were remarkably forthcoming and amazingly helpful. Several of them, a couple not so much.
And those were post-adjudication people who were...
Yeah, they were doing their terms, and I spent 4 days with one of them in a prison in Texas, who was a remarkable source of information, but he was not the only one. Again, also this is, you're talking to people I'm talking to people, cops, prosecutors, local people in the drug counselors and so on, this kind of thing.
No defense attorneys?
Sure, all the time.
I'm always asking for balance.
No, sure, yeah. And sometimes they were the ones who hooked me up, a couple of times, not too often, a couple of times. But they were also ones who kind of gave me, now that the case was done, it was like more thoughtful commentary than they would have given me during the time when they were actually avidly defending their clients. Now there was more like, okay, well, he was kind of like this, and you just get a different perspective. That's not the only thing I do, but I make, ever since I worked in Stockton, I've made going to jails and prisons a top priority. I spend lots of time in those places because you can learn so much in jail and prison. Particularly, you'd be surprised how many people don't mind talking to you. That's what keeps surprising me. And when I talk to him, one guy, for example, he wouldn't talk to me, but then he got out, and he's down in Nayarit, and I flew down, and he didn't want to talk to me in Nayarit, but he took a bus. And so we met in another town, and I spoke to that guy for quite a long time, All of these guys grew up in the great generation of the Jalisco business model, which is not unlike the business model for the Hondurans. Now, I have not interviewed Hondurans. I've not been to Honduras. So you can take what I'm saying as with that in mind.
So it's somewhat anecdotal from what
certainly. But the truth is, in a poor town, once somebody comes up with a way of leaving poverty, everybody wants to do it. Because everybody has to compete with that guy. One guy told me, I began to do it because my friend from kindergarten went to North Carolina, sold heroin for a bunch of years, came back and built himself a house with an automatic garage door opener. Everybody in my village, which is like near Jalisco, not there, He said, everybody in my village turned out to watch that garage door opener go up and down and up and down. It was like a attraction.
So you're saying that one of the common threads is poverty, that
Poverty,
having
but here's the
employment,
other
having
thing.
other options,
Yes.
being able to take care of yourself is kind of a common thread.
Sure, but there's another thing too. That I wrote my second book was all about this idea. That part of migration from Mexico, anyway, and I'm assuming it's also true of Honduras, but
Now,
whatever.
you're assuming.
Yeah, I know,
Proud to
but yeah, there you go. But the part of being poor in Mexico is part of it's being not having a lot of money or access to. The other part is being humiliated because you don't have a lot of money by people who are not that much wealthier than you. There's a famous T-shirt that I wish I had purchased. I saw in a liquor store once in South Central that said, "La vida recia, porque cuando eres pobre te humillan." Right? The fast life, the drug life, had a pistol on the shirt as well. The fast life, because when you're poor, they humiliate you. And heroin became a way of, yes, elevating your economic status, but also your social status, so people would no longer humiliate you. This one guy told me one of my best moments of my life is when I went into the butcher's shop with my mom, who had always been disrespected by the butcher and the baker and all the other merchants, where she had to ask for credit. And all of a sudden, all these guys just were so obsequious and bending over backward for my mom. Why? Because I brought home $15,000 with heroin money. It totally transformed. He never, ever forgot that moment. So we need to understand, I think, I lived in Mexico 10 years, wrote a ton about immigration. It's a complicated thing. It doesn't just involve poverty. It involves a lot of psychology, a lot of sociology, a lot of social questions, class questions, and that kind of thing. And heroin, for these guys, I talked to one guy in the town when I went down to Jalisco. He said, my boy doesn't have to go up there and do that business. He didn't mention what it was, but we knew what it was. He said, and I said, why? He says, because we have land. I wouldn't send him to do, The guys who went up to California and to North Carolina and wherever, Indianapolis, they didn't have any land. They didn't have any father with lots of land. They had to go kind of create it for themselves. Now, there is a socioeconomic aspect to this that is extraordinarily powerful. It's also psychological. All of that wraps up into why you would want to go north. On the other hand, too, they were attracted because these were not Scarface killers. They were not trying to be the next Chapo Guzman. They were trying to get enough money to buy a new used truck, right? They were not trying to get enough money to buy a piece of land so some girl would want to marry them, that kind of thing. It's a real basic stuff. And so they were eager to go because they knew, and they had several of them explain this to me, that there was almost no consequence. The system that they set up made everybody look like they were the smallest time traffickers on the street, right? And with just they look like Home Depot day workers. No bling, none of that stuff. They sent all their money home. They lived like church mice. And that was because they wanted to make sure that nothing happened to them while they were up here, but also because the place where they wanted to be seen was back home, bringing home all the Levi's 501s and the perfume bottles for the women and all that kind of stuff, ending the humiliation.
The title, The Least of Us, is that where the title resonates?
The Least of Us comes from the fact that when I was writing the book, my publisher after Dreamland insisted I write another book. I was exhausted, and I say, and he said, don't worry about writing a book proposal. Now, that's not a good idea. Every author needs a book outline, a book saying, well, here's the roadmap, more or less. Whether you follow it necessarily may not matter. But I did not have a good guide. And I was struggling, and I was in a big plastic bag trying to get out, trying to find out, what am I supposed to write about? How's this supposed to look? And it's a complicated thing, but I'm not a Christian, but I began to read the Bible. I'd already read the Gospels, but I reread the Gospel, came upon the book of Matthew, of course, and that which you do unto the least of these, my brethren, you do unto me. And I was also dealing with the idea that, or entertaining the idea that this was a topic in broad ways, was about concepts of the least among us, the people who, the addicts eating from the trash, but also the way we get to a solution or solutions, because there is no solution, is through smallest little daily work. So half the book's about meth and fentanyl, but the other half of the book is about people, Americans, in just the tiniest ways, attempting to transform their street or church or park or whatever, that kind of thing. And so the idea of the least of us, we got into the opioid epidemic because we wanted a magic answer to a very complicated problem involving brain chemistry, which is that, pain. How do we resolve pain? Well, here's how we do it. It's a miracle. Science has now figured out that one pill for every single human being, and we're still paying for the consequences for that. And I began to think, we need to get away from these very toxic ideas like we can solve all our problems with one solution. We tried that with law enforcement, right? We said, the problem with drug war was not that we used law enforcement, it's that we only use law enforcement. I think with homelessness, the problem is, we're saying, well, it's only a housing issue. I'm sorry, it's not. It's very much connected to many other issues. And I would say, in many areas, far more so the drug issue than anything related to housing. Clarksburg has no affordable housing problem, and yet they had a huge homeless problem there, and still do.
Thank you. All right, we have questions from the audience. I'm asking that you come forward because we have one microphone that I'm going to lend over. And thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you, Judge, so much. So appreciate it.
For those of you on the webinar, please post your questions in the Q&A section. Audrey.
Hi, I'm Audrey Barron at Swanson and McNamara. I heard you talk about the importance of getting people off the street who are experiencing addiction, and I can agree with that goal. And I heard you talk about jail and law enforcement as the sort of proposed solution. And I think that many of the criminal defense attorneys here, and probably some of the drug prosecutors as well, could tell you stories of clients or defendants who were charged and were sent to rehab and told they had to complete this program or they would certainly go to jail, and they could not complete the program and they went to jail. And then, of course, once you're in jail, treatment is not actually forced either. It's compelled, but it's not forced. And correct me if you disagree, but I think the only true form of forced treatment is civil commitment, and that's something I haven't heard you talk about. And I wondered if you have thoughts on State Bill 43 and Senator Wiener and Senator Eggman's efforts to expand the definition of gravely disabled and to allow the state to civilly commit people who are very clearly suffering from grave addiction and to actually force treatment and then get people into long-term housing in a way that doesn't involve the criminal justice system at all.
Thank you for your question, because we have some others standing behind you, so we want you to answer.
Yeah. Okay. Well, there's just so much there. I would say that I've, I would say that jail is a component of what we need to be trying, given the drugs on the street. It's not the component. Okay. I do not believe that there is a solution or one solution to any of this. I do believe, as I've said, that in some areas, it's not been tried in California as far as I know, but in some communities you see the absolutely beneficial effect of it by creating, as I said, a continuum of care, which is absolutely what's necessary. A continuum of care that stops with, say, if you had a recovery pod in jail, it would seem to me to be kind of a pointless thing. You just release people to the lives that they knew before, and there's not that support, there's not that community support that I think needs to be. I do believe that in my reporting, I can tell you, I've just heard so many people tell me the best day of my life was when I got arrested, because I'd be dead otherwise, and I do believe that. I do believe we need to rethink civil commitment. I do not believe that it is any kind of compassionate to be leaving people on the street when the drugs on the street are fentanyl and methamphetamine that will drive you mad and kill you. I don't see how that's at all consistent with any kind of compassion. I understand it's a touchy issue and needs some careful wording, I guess, in whatever we come up with. But I actually believe that we need that right now more than ever. When they closed the mental institutions back during the Reagan years and so on, the idea was we now have drugs to be able to treat mental illness at home, so we don't need these things. The problem is we never went the next step and built the local community-based mental illness housing, which could not be more. In fact, what we said was, you know what? We're just going to leave that to law enforcement. Again, we're going to leave it to law enforcement. They're 24/7. They're all over the city. They have arresting powers and they have guns. So we're going to deal. And we have been putting police in the position of being our mental health professionals very unfairly, in my opinion, and I believe we need to. There needs to be some requirement that every town have some small, again, the least amount. A small amount of mental health housing. Could be 5-6 beds. It doesn't need to be a lot. But it needs to be that everybody takes a part of this, and it's going to cost a lot. It requires doctors, nurses, requires oversight that is important and ongoing. There's a lot that goes into it, and I'm not the one to write that legislation, thank God. But I totally believe that we are now in a situation where the drugs on the street, again, there is no friction to use. These drugs are the most potent we've ever seen, and they are killing people and driving people mad before they do that. And we need some way of moving people away from that. And I just don't, you can offer treatment, but if 95% of the people say no, and if even those people who say yes, they can opt out of it too, and so they leave. I think that presents us with a bunch of tough questions that we have not had to ask ourselves really so much up to now, or maybe we've just been hiding our heads in the sand on that topic.
Speaking of tough questions, we have about 15 minutes remaining, and we have a second question, third, and fourth. I think there was another gentleman who wanted to ask a question, but who may have rested. If he can rejoin us, go ahead.
Sam, thank you for being here. You talk in The Least of Us about, as sort of a prelude to the fentanyl crisis, the overprescription of opioids. Creating sort of like a generation of users. I think prescription practices have changed. Is there any hope in the idea that as a result of changed medical practices, we're not generating as many opiate-hooked people, medically addicted?
It was a remarkable experience that I went through after that book came out because I saw just so much change. One of the things that did change, but I think went too far, is the idea that, okay, we were massively overprescribing these pills to almost anybody and endless refills and staggering supply. Again, it was about supply. Supply, that's the first example, supply creating demand. West Virginia was among the lowest rates of addiction and overdose in the country until those pills came, and now they're number one. So, it's like, it's a real problem that we created. Now, as my book came out and I began to talk about it, I began to watch attitudes change and doctors come under more scrutiny. The problem, I believe, is that now we've gone, again, we don't find a middle ground very easily, I guess, in our culture. And it went all the way to the other side. And so now people who really probably need opioids, say for like 80-year-old with arthritis, say, aren't getting it. But I do believe that whole problem, though, that you described, and I described in my book Dreamland, created, through supply, created a massive overdose, a population of opioid-addicted Americans, upon which the trafficking world in Mexico took ample advantage, and the pain pills and the pills and fentanyl and all that are just part of that. Now, I think we need to figure out a different way of just saying all or nothing. I spoke with a guy who had chronic pain suffer all his life. He says, with us, it's either all or nothing. You have way too many or you have none at all. And I would like to see something in the middle. I think that sounded eminently reasonable, honestly. And one thing that needs to kind of, I would hope would come from this. It's still not really there yet, you know. But to me, that's what I began. I came up from Mexico. You know, I lived 10 years down there, wrote 2 books about Mexico, and I kind of believed the spiel from the Mexican government, which is that, you know, this is all demand-driven. And writing Dreamland, I came to, I started that thinking that, started that book thinking that, and the experience of doing the research on it changed my mind about that completely. I just said, no, this is not about demand, this is about supply, creating demand, and that continues. All opioids do that. The Sacklers knew that. The Sacklers, Purdue Pharma knew this very easily. That's why they marketed oxycodone in 5 milligram and 10 milligram, because to convince reluctant docs who've been told opioids you never prescribe them except for terminal cancer patients, no, now you can do it for all kinds of problems. Well, I don't want to do 20 or 40 milligrams. That seems crazy. No, doc, you don't have to. We've got 5 milligrams. They pushed these because they knew that you get the doctors prescribing it with the supply, and pretty soon that patient's going to be up there. If they last 100 days, they're going to be there 5 years later. They understood the basic truth that in this issue, opioids and so on, fentanyl too, it's all about supply, creating demand because of those powerful effects those drugs have on the brain chemistry.
Thank you, Mr. Quinones, for being here and speaking with us.
Thank you.
My question is, what do you see as some of the root causes of drug addiction, and how do we address those issues?
Wow. I mean, you're talking about stuff you could write like several books about. I think books have been written about. There's many things. I mean, there's certainly a genetic component for some people. With opioids, the longer you use them, say in a pharmaceutical setting, the more disposition you have to being addicted to them, even if you have no genetic disposition. I would say, you know, it's a combination of access to supply and other elements that are part of your life. Trauma is just so important, it seems to me, in all this. But there are many people who really have not suffered much trauma in their lives who nevertheless, because of the supply, got addicted. And so there's environmental issues, there's, you know, the family, how you grew up, that kind of thing. I believe, frankly, in the Dreamland book, one of the things that I thought I was writing a book about drug trafficking and drug companies, drug traffickers and drug companies, right? And how they marketed pain pills and heroin. Okay, that was what I was, and along the way I began to realize, yeah, this is about something much different, actually, or bigger, not different, but bigger. And that is that our own isolation, our own shredding of community that we have done for 40 years, by my count anyway, maybe more, right? In so many ways. Wealthy communities, poor communities, middle class, Rust Belt community, whatever, it doesn't matter. That's the one common denominator in our country, is that we have shredded the bonds that we're not just good things, they're essential things. They're why we survived as a species, right? We survived as a species through community, right? The caveman, I say occasionally in my talks, the caveman who went off and marched the beat of his own drummer, that guy got eaten, right? And yet in this culture, in our country, we have, I think, we have just done such a masterful job of shredding those bonds that bring us together. It could be like municipal development, could be, you know, job loss, could be, again, the various traumatic things that take place. All these kinds of things kind of play a part in drug addiction. And it's particularly ominous, I think, and scary to talk with female who have been addicted, and almost every one of them has some kind of sexual abuse or something like that, you know. You know, but it's a complicated question, and there's a whole lot to say, and I don't really have time, nor am I the person to answer that question as fully as can be answered. There's many people more brilliant than I am on that topic, just FYI.
Thank you for your presentation. It was very informational.
Thank you.
So I have a sort of a two-pronged question, and the first part of it is, do we have any kind of an alliance with Mexico where we are?
We do not.
That was fast. And then the other side of it is, when the cartels bring fentanyl into the country, do they usually just send their own people here, or do they target certain Americans to distribute them?
It's important to understand, it's a very interesting question, one I think about a lot. We call these cartels, right? And to some degree, what people mean when they say cartel is some overarching organization with certain control and certain power. But, I went to Berkeley. I studied economics there, and what little remains of my economic education from so many years ago was a cartel is a group of producers who band together to force price up. OPEC is, right, of course, the main idea, right? Mm-hmm. That is not what's going on in Mexico. The opposite, methamphetamine, we don't have pricing history for fentanyl. We do very definitely for methamphetamine, and methamphetamine pricing has dropped by like 95%. It's just staggering. In Fresno, I was speaking with a longtime narc in Fresno, and he said, when I started in 2008, which is just about the time the methamphetamine began to change in the way it was made down there, and the result recreated all this schizophrenia and so on that we're seeing all across the country. We were paying $20,000 undercover for a pound of meth. Now we're paying $800. I'm currently living in Nashville. The price 6 years, was it? They told me 7 years ago was $16,000 per pound. Now it's under $2,000 per pound. What that means is that there is not one, GM of dope in Mexico.
Oh, yeah.
It's a whole diffuse, very robust, throbbing ecosystem of producers and logisticians, et cetera, many other things. But the knowledge and the access to ingredient chemicals is profound. There's just so much of this stuff coming in, and that's why you can get meth that's dropped in price by 95%. That's why so much fentanyl is coming in, that you have tens of millions of pills coming in from Mexico that are made by many, many different producers, and not just one guy making this stuff or one factory making this. Everybody knows how they can buy a pill press on the internet for $5,000 and they can make it that way, Right. And so to me, this is the problem. And when it comes to Mexico, look, we both of us, these governments have spent our time pointing fingers at the other. Mexico, again, I lived there for quite a long time. I don't see Mexico with any kind of rose-colored glasses. It has a very severe problem with corruption that is destroying the opportunities and economic development and many, many other things of people all across that country, but certainly on the western side of Mexico, no matter how much money it actually makes people, and it's just a lot. From our side, we have a positively obtuse approach to assault weapons. Those assault, when I was in Stockton, I covered the first rampage murder, which was with an AK-47 in January of 1989. After that, a few years later, they put in the assault weapon ban of banning commercial sale of assault weapons that ended in 2004. I do not think it's a coincidence that the drug cartel wars down in Mexico began in Sirius in 2005. Because again, it's about supply. They could get their hands on remarkably potent weapons, remarkably potent ammunition and clips, and it's been out of control ever since, as have been our rampage murders, as we've seen every 2 weeks apparently in this country.
The reason I asked the question about whether they send their, what? Oh, okay. Okay. That was my most interesting question, but that's okay.
Hi, this is a great segue because I wanted to ask about Mexico too. So you wrote in the Washington Post in, I think, March that improving United States and Mexico relations is what's going to solve the fentanyl crisis. How would this diplomacy help those who have overdosed or who have already passed away from fentanyl? And will this diplomacy be felt immediately, or will local communities still have to fashion together their communal ties?
Well, I mean, it seems to me that this has outstripped the capacity of many of counties and towns across the country to deal with. It's just way beyond what they're even remotely, it's overwhelming coroner's offices, foster children agencies, it's, jails and courts, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all of that stuff. It seems to me that this now needs to be a major priority. Of course, there are many things that Mexico and the United States have bickered over, and I understand the history of Mexico and the United States relations and all the distrust and ignorance and et cetera, that bedeviled that relationship. But I would think that fentanyl, being such a devastating thing down in Mexico and such a devastating thing up here, that it would be a vehicle through which we could overcome that history, but I have to say, as I wrote in that story, that counties are just overwhelmed. Counties all across the country, far poorer than this county, are overwhelmed with kind of how to deal with this. And again, as I say, everywhere I go, I talk to people, what's your main issue? It's fentanyl and meth, or it's meth and fentanyl. Fentanyl and meth have changed history. Remember, drug historians say we used to have cycles, stimulants to depressants, back to stimulant every 10, 15 years. That's done. The supply has changed that entirely. Now it's stimulant and depressant everywhere, all at the same time. And it doesn't need to be this way. Now I have my feelings that it's a complicated story. I would say the current president of Mexico does not seem to understand the moment that his country is living through when it comes to this topic. I would say that we have an absolute, we just need to do so much with regard to reining in the access to those weapons. It's like we're arming the very people, we're using those weapons to ensure their ability to create the kind of drugs that are killing our people and driving them to schizophrenia, right? And to me, that's obtuse, that's weird, And maybe it's also because, 1989, I was on the school grounds where this guy had just murdered 5 little kids, and thinking, okay, this is the last time I'm ever going to see this. I've since covered 7. I've covered 7, and there was a time when I thought no reporter in America is ever going to cover 7 rampage murders, and I'm quite sure that's not true anymore either. So to me, those are the balances that we need to, and the problem is, I think that Biden in particular, but I think Trump as well, was hemmed in by the immigration issue too. And Mexico's doing all this to help us keep people out, and by even allowing them to come through, that we can't insist too much on this other issue. I think we need to step up. I think that Twitter feed of that guy in Nogales, the Customs Border Patrol guy, they put up all the assault weapons that they confiscate going south into Mexico. It's an amazing thing to watch. It's just nothing but assault weapons and ammo and stuff like that.
Our last question, and then we're going to get ready so that those of you who are here who'd like to have some one-on-one time will be able to have that.
Sure.
Thank you so much. I know you've talked a lot about the solutions, plural, which stems around from the much-needed support, somewhat reactionary to what's going on. I think in the Atlantic, you made the comment about how the traffickers are operating like corporations and corporations are operating like traffickers. So I'm wondering how you could if you could speak a little bit to the role of the corporations in America, whether it's the prison industrial complex, the gun companies that have the stranglehold. You've talked a lot about that, but just the not having a livable wage for the regular jobs and what that does to put them in this situation. And again, just to speak a little bit about corporations and their role with this whole problem.
Sure. I mean, I began to think about that with Dreamland and the Sackler family and the Purdue Pharma company and all the other companies that got into marketing the opioids, right? And began to think, damn, these guys are behaving just like these trafficker guys I've been writing about. But then with the least of us, I began to focus on corporations that are selling other things, similarly, you might say addictive products, but legal addictive products, right? And so, we see it now most glaringly, most recently with the gambling apps that are on every sports program, right? If you watch some of these sports programs like the NCAA tournament, I remember every commercial break was one or two gambling apps and then some addictive fast food and sugar too. So you have all this panorama, right? And way out here is the Sinaloa drug cartel. But during our lifetimes, particularly during my lifetime, I'm 64, I have watched as this entire transformation has taken place, and we allow marketing of stuff that in my opinion, we should never, certainly gambling apps are top of the bill right now anyway, top of mind. But you have this whole panorama. It begins with the Facebook software engineer and the pornographer and the video game designer and the gambling casino, and then you have, of course, social media. We could go on and on about that and how much we allow our kids to be just dented by that stuff. And then all the way out here is the Sinaloa drug cartel, right? But what they're all have in common is that they're all attempting to produce products that will mess with our brain chemistry to the point where we obey, their marketing. Yep. Why do the fast food places never change their logos? Because they're triggers for cravings. Why are they on every intersection and because it's a no friction to use idea, right? We have allowed this to happen in our culture. Basically because we say, well, we don't want government to be standing in the way of people making money and offering jobs and all that. Okay, but I mean, it seems to me that we don't allow tobacco. I'm not sure why on earth we allow gambling. And I think some of these other things, China limits TikTok to 45 minutes a day. Yeah, what's wrong with that? I don't see a problem. Anyway, but it struck me that this story was about corporations, how we had allowed corporations to become almost like drug traffickers and use the same techniques almost. And the first ads that I was able to find from fast food, they used the language of addiction. This will trigger your cravings, our burgers, Well, any addict knows that triggering and cravings, that's a torment, right? But they're like, and all the ads for the burgers, they're like pornographic, big gushing burgers oozing fat, like the burger itself just had sex. I mean, it's like this thing. Like I got, it's like taken right out of pornographic magazines. Seems to me. I don't know. Anyway, this is there's a lot you could talk about this, but to my way of thinking, I wanted to draw the comparison between a lot of the companies that we see every single day on TV and the Sinaloa drug cartel.
Speaking of the cartel, this is a question that came from our viewing audience who's not here, and I apologize for those who are here who I had to interrupt because we knew that there were some questions coming in. The cartel will never go away in Mexico. Why not focus on severe penalties for fentanyl distribution in the United States, like in Singapore, for a solution? That is a question from our viewing audience.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd go that. I mean, we do have a certain culture when it comes to government and government's involvement in our lives and that kind of thing. And I don't think Americans would go that far, honestly. I just don't. I think it's just, it doesn't seem to me that they would support anything like that.
Well, Mr. Quinones, I want to personally thank you because
Oh,
I
you're welcome.
know what you had to do to get here from Tennessee to Los Angeles to here. And I know that you have a plane to catch, and the most time we're going to have with you is until about 6:30. I apologize to those who I cut short, but I do want to give him time to be able to sign books, meet with you one-on-one, and actually allow you to have some dialogue. But I want to personally thank you
Thank you
because your
very
book
much,
was
Judge. Really appreciate it.
fascinating.
Thank you.
You tolerated a lot of my questions both before and after, and we appreciate you.
Thank you very much. So nice of you.
Thank you.
Thank you all very, very much.
All right. Thank you to each of you who attended today. We're going to recess from this part of the dialogue, and Mr. Quinones is going to probably sign some books and talk to each of you. He does have to leave at 6:30 prompt, so it's going to be followed by a reception, so please be mindful of his time and allow everybody who wants to have a few moments with him to get that opportunity. Thank you again. I appreciate all the questions, and thank you to the Federal Bar Association. You pulled this off in a very brief period of time from our spring conference, and it's amazing the amount of work and support that people put into this behind the scenes, and it did not go unnoticed, and we thank you for all your hard work. So thank you again, and I'm going to hand it over to Randy Sue Pollock, and that concludes our program. Thank you.
Thank you.